Okay, so I finally got around to watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022, and yeah, there's a lot to get into, so let's. Firstly, a small rant. Why the hell are movies doing this thing where they share the exact name of the original but exist as sequels? Halloween did it in 2018, and now Texas Chainsaw Massacre is keeping the ball rolling here in 2022. For all of their flaws, at least Friday the 13th, 2009 and Nightmare on Elm Street 2010 were complete reboots. Not here though. TCM 2022 is a direct follow-up to the original 1974 classic. Why not just add a subtitle to differentiate it from the movie it's following? Call it something like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Harlow, or The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the Netflix one. Anything is better than what we have, because what we have is a system where the sequel to The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I hate this trend with every fiber of my being. Rants about stupid naming conventions aside, there's actually a lot to talk about with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022, and I'm excited to get into it. Quick thing to note here is that this is a spoiler-heavy review, and if you haven't seen the film yet, put this video in your watch later list and come back once you've seen the movie. Obviously, reviews are fun, but they in no way convey the experience of actually seeing a film for yourself, so I'd encourage you to hop on Netflix and watch this one for yourself before going any further. It's important to develop your own ideas about a film instead of just taking mine at face value. That out of the way, let's get into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022. The film is set in, you guessed it, Texas, and follows a young band of Austin-based liberals as they venture out into the ultra-conservative state and try to carve out a community for themselves. And just to get out ahead of this criticism, I don't have a problem with this premise for a Texas Chainsaw film. The original did mostly the same thing, just with 70s counterculture hippies instead of woke zoomers, so I don't see this as some grand betrayal to the franchise's roots. As long as the film can present them in entertaining ways, I don't have an issue with serious discussions being had, even in schlocky slashers like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. As for the film's other minor controversy, that being that it wasn't filmed in Texas, but instead in Sofia, Bulgaria, I don't really have a problem with it. While it would be ideal to film it in Texas, and I highly doubt that they couldn't have found somewhere to shoot in the Lone Star State, the landscape of Bulgaria works well enough as a Texas stand-in. This is kind of a non-issue for me. The movie begins with narration from John Larroquette, and honestly, it's awesome to hear his voice in a chainsaw movie again. His narration in the original was nearly as iconic as the flashbulb sound effect, and not nearly as played out, so this was a welcome way to start the movie. Larroquette basically tells us about the events of the original film, and how characters like Franklin met their demise. Nowadays, Sally Hardesty is a Laurie Strode-like shut-in who never talks about what happened in '74. It's revealed that this intro is actually part of a TV series, a little Netflix-like documentary on the summer of '74, and after this, we're actually introduced to our main characters. The main cast is made up of Elsie Fisher's Lila, Sarah Yarkin's Melody, Jacob Lattimore's Dante, and Nell Hudson's Ruth. I didn't recognize any of these characters from past jobs, but apparently Sarah Yarkin appeared in American Horror Story and Happy Death Day 2U, which was actually a pretty good film, the latter one. I thought I recognized Elsie Fisher, but then I realized I was mixing her up with Carl from The Walking Dead, and a full film later, and I still find the resemblance uncanny. I legitimately thought it might be the same actor, but it wasn't. It was a different person. So, Fisher did apparently play one of the girls in Despicable Me, Agnes. And if you don't remember which one Agnes was, don't worry, neither did I. Which led me to, of all places, the Despicable Me wiki. The things I do for you. By the way, this one's Agnes. This is Agnes. I don't remember the other one's names, quit asking. Anyway, the gang is at a gas station when the film begins. Lila watches a report on the original massacre and asks the gas station attendant about what happened to Sally. He says Sally became a Texas Ranger, the officer kind, not the baseball player kind, and spent years looking for Bubba to no avail. After the girls tell the attendant that they're going to Harlow, Texas, he says everybody has heard about what they're planning. Once the girls leave, the attendant calls them gentry fuckers behind their backs, which plays into a major theme of the movie. Texas Chainsaw 2022 is very concerned with the concept of gentrification, a term generally defined as being the process in which a typically poor neighborhood or city is infused with wealthier inhabitants, and the cost of living goes up until the original residents can't afford to live there anymore. One major issue with gentrification is the almost inevitable loss of culture, wherein locals who love the area are driven out and replaced with sterile, cultureless shopping centers, restaurants, and suburbs. This is an interesting angle for Texas Chainsaw to take, as gentrification, which is a word I will not be pronouncing correctly today, is usually concerned with urban areas, but as shown in this movie, it can absolutely affect rural areas too. Growing up in Mississippi, I've seen this very thing happen in several cities and towns over the course of my life, and it's kind of refreshing to see a film speak to that. Without getting too far into politics, it's important to remember that gentrification isn't a right versus left issue, and compassion for the little guy is always important, so be kind. Just after returning to the pump, where we meet Ruth and Dante for the first time, the group is joined by an unnamed man who will later be identified as Richter. From his large truck to the gun on his waist, Richter is very Texan, and this rubs Melody in the wrong way, who promptly and loudly laughs at Richter for apparently having a small penis. She's not the only one, as the whole group treats Richter like he's some kind of an animal on exhibit, staring and gawking at him like they've never seen someone like him before. Richter keeps his cool and says that he carries the gun because the area is overrun with feral hogs, and there may be some political undertones here, but the scene ends with the group scurrying off before Melody can cause more problems. This scene was a bold choice, as it introduces us to our main characters in a way that doesn't exactly make them seem sympathetic. Richter was just filling up on gas when Melody decided to start hurling insults, so she was definitely in the wrong here, but again, this is one of the main points of the film. Austin, Texas is sometimes called the blueberry in a cherry pie, meaning, blue, politically liberal, red, politically conservative. So this is a film about residents of a hyper-liberal city moving to hyper-conservative rural Texas. And overall, this scene was fine in what it set up, so I don't really have a problem with it. And if anything, again, it kind of keeps with the trend of the franchise because not every character was likable in the original one either, so I don't have a problem with it. Though, again, I understand that for some people, the mere mention of politics is enough to ruin a film for them. So if you are that type, this is probably not the film for you. But overall, this was a fine setup scene. As the group heads into town, Lila scrolls through Instagram, and yeah, we do get more politics here. It's immediately obvious that some kind of tragedy has happened because every post on her timeline is about hands up, don't shoot, stopping racism, banning assault rifles, and remembering students from Stonebrook High, which I would assume is probably a reference to Stoneman Douglas, but I can't confirm that. Lila also has a pretty interesting scar that obviously came from a gun of some kind. It's a short scene, but I mention it here because it does set up one of the best moments in the film later, so we'll come back to this. The group is stopped outside of the city by Harlow's sheriff, who offers to help if there's any trouble, but also asks that the kids be respectful of Harlow and its people. Melody wins him over by saying that her grandmother was from Harlow and reciting an old Harlow saying. This wins the sheriff over and he leaves them be. The group arrives in Harlow and begins preparing for a bus full of investors to arrive. To their horror, though, it turns out that Richter was the person they hired to pretty up the town before arriving. Again, Melody mean mugs the guy this whole time, but the meeting goes by without much incident. The real incident is that Harlow's main street actually has a beat-up old Confederate flag flying outside of the town orphanage, which they know will scare off the investors. Dante and Melody go inside the orphanage to find a way to get the flag, but inside they meet Mrs. MC, played by Alice Craigie? I'm not going to get that name right. Though a little off-putting, Mrs. MC is friendly at first, excited to meet her new neighbors and offer them sweet tea. Dante and Melody are having none of it though, as they inform her that they've bought her property and she has to leave. There's a dispute over who has the title to the property, and MC questions if the group's hostility is because of her Confederate flag. She says she's not racist and that she doesn't have a problem with, and I quote, Negroes. This understandably upsets Dante and he storms out of the house. While Melody argues with MC about how she has to leave, Bubba comes down the stairs, worried about his mama. This feels like a good time to mention that Bubba is played in this one by Mark Burnham. And again, I'm not familiar with any of his work, but if I were to compare him to past Bubbas, he brings a good physicality to the role, which for a mute character is extremely important, and I think he generally does a good job here. MC promptly sends Bubba back to his room, insisting that she's fine. But then Dante returns with police, and they forcefully remove MC from the property. Due to the heightened stress of the situation, MC has a heart attack, and is rushed off by the sheriff, accompanied by another police officer, Ruth, and most importantly, Bubba. While all of this is happening, the investors arrive and Dante goes to tend to them. While he does that, Melody and Lila get into an argument where Melody is once again kind of an asshole. Finally, somebody in this film serves as the voice of reason, as Lila points out the insanity of Dante's plan. After the fight, Lila storms off and it's later revealed that she went to Richter's garage. In the sheriff's van, Mrs. MC passes away and Bubba... he doesn't take it well. He tries desperately to save his mama, but when the officer stops him, Bubba breaks the officer's arm and stabs him to death with his own bones. Holy shit. The scene is comically gory, but not exactly scary. Because it's a horror movie, the officer accidentally shoots the sheriff, who's driving the car, and they all crash into a field of sunflowers. We rejoin our main group with Lila speaking to Richter. Like someone who read the wiki overview on Nietzsche and called it a day, she diagnoses Richter as a nihilist because he, wait for it, drives a truck. It's clunky scenes like this one that help me understand why so many people have reacted to this movie with such vitriol. While talking, Lila picks up Richter's weapon, which is an assault rifle of some kind. I'm not a gun guy, so please don't bully me in the comments, but it's a black assault rifle, so I'm gonna call it an AR and move on with my day. Feel free to leave the proper model down in the comments if I'm wrong. We then get the most intense aspect of this film. Flashbacks show that Lila is a survivor of a high school shooting. We find out that she has intense survivor's guilt, and that she thinks her friends should have survived over her. For all of this film's flaws, of which there are many, the stuff with Lila is moving and genuinely emotional. The film is touching on something very real and very traumatic, and while it may feel out of place in a Texas Chainsaw movie, it does help do a good job of grounding the sometimes comical violence of the series. This does, of course, create a bit of a disconnect, but we'll get to that in my closing thoughts. Melody's redemption begins when she finds out that Miss MC has died. Though she's still extremely rude to Richter for really no reason, she shows great remorse and wants to leave at once. Richter isn't having this though, as he thinks they're trying to flee the scene of a potential crime, and he takes the keys until the group can prove that they weren't breaking and entering. We then get a really drawn out scene in the sunflower field, wherein Bubba cuts off his mama's face and wears it as a mask, which is delightfully messed up, and I kinda love it. It's always been obvious that Bubba acts out of a misguided sense of love, rather than malice, so him wearing MC's face is extremely on point for the character. To Bubba, there's no greater sign of appreciation than making somebody into one of his patented leather faces. That part's good, but the following moments where Bubba kills the sheriff and Ruth take what feels like an eternity and offers very little in the way of scares. The most important things about this scene are that Bubba has begun his rampage, and Ruth put out a distress call that will eventually bring Sally into the film. Oh, and we also get this glorious shot of Bubba rising from the sunflowers. It's like an especially spooky scene from Teletubbies. It is so stupid, and I love it. Dante and Melody once again enter Bubba's house, this time looking for Miss MC's alleged deed. To Melody's horror, she does find the title to the house, meaning they kicked an innocent woman out of a house she rightfully owned and inadvertently killed her. While Melody is finding the title, Dante finds a cleaver to the fucking face. Oh my gosh. The injury looks gnarly, and while it doesn't do much to match up to Leatherface's surprise debut in the original, it's not bad. It's a decent kill. It's not immediate though, because after losing ludicrous amounts of blood, Dante stumbles into the streets, where he promptly dies in Richter's arms. Proving he was a good guy all along, which surprised me because what's a Texas Chainsaw movie without the whole fucking world being in on the con, Richter hides the investors in the party bus and goes to the orphanage to confront Bubba. This goes poorly, and Richter catches a bad case of mortality. Poor guy, he was my favorite. In the sunflower field, we finally get an extended Sally scene. Now, it's important to note that Sally Hardesty is played here by Olwen Foyer? I'm just going to insert something here.
Foray.
In this movie, and not Marilyn Burns. Normally, the recasting of such an iconic final girl would be the cause for riot, but tragically, Miss Burns died of an apparent heart attack in August of 2014. She was 65, rest in peace to an absolute legend. In the field, Sally finds the skinned corpse of MC, confirming that her tormentor is back and killing again. Speaking of her tormentor, Leatherface finds Melody sneaking around the house and fucking Huntress hatchets her through the floorboards, but with a hammer, so, you know, it's a Bubba touch. This leads to another drawn out sequence in which Melody ends up in a ridiculous chainsaw chase that probably sounded really cool on paper, but looks so dumb in execution. Bubba ends up severing sewage pipes, and Melody is covered in human feces. Lovely. I love that. I'm glad it's in the film. I love that. Now joined by Lila, Melody escapes to the party bus and tells the driver to get them out of there. He would, of course, but he develops a bad case of Petey Bird at the worst possible time. Bubba enters the bus, and we're given the most amazing line in the history of cinema. Thankfully, Bubba kicks the live stream up a notch and slaughters the whole bus. Decent stream, 8 out of 10. Too much Bubba, not enough Booba. As Bubba kills everyone, we get a uniquely intense scene where the bus tragedy brings back Lila's school shooting trauma. This is the best scene of the film, easily, and it is visceral. Weirdly, the scene immediately gets goofy again once the sisters hide in the bathroom. Like, nobody wants to make a run for it until half the bus is dead. And speaking of half, a banker named Catherine gets cut in half as she tries to escape, and it's actually pretty cool. Bubba nearly has Melody trapped, but she drives a corkscrew into his arm, and this apparently stuns Big Bubba, so yeah, alright, whatever. Outside of the bus, Sally rolls into town, and she asks the sisters if it's Bubba, which... yeah, duh. Like, who else is cutting off and wearing faces? I mean, okay. Anyway, she picks up the sisters, she puts them in her car, and we get a monologue that is most definitely designed for the trailers. Sally decides to use the sisters as bait, which is pretty messed up, actually. Melody's actress does a really good job here, by the way, of conveying the fear and anger in her voice, as again, Sally uses her as bait. What are you doing, Sally? Shotgun in hand, Sally goes to confront Leatherface. She goes into the orphanage and finds the big boy sitting in his big bed like a big sad boy. Sally says the name of her deceased friends before ordering the mute Leatherface to say her name. But it doesn't take her long before she realizes that he doesn't remember her. He doesn't remember what he did to her friends. He doesn't care about her, and he certainly hasn't been obsessing about her like she has over him. Entirely bored of this reunion, Bubba actually just leaves the room and goes to kill Lila. But thankfully, he catches a bullet to his shoulder before he can do it. Sally is, I'm gonna be honest, she's kind of off her rocker. She's losing her mind here. She's laughing as she's shooting him and all that, and it's really hard to tell who the crazy one is here. Anyway, Bubba is actually kind of nimble in this film. I mean, he disappears a few times, and he gets out of her sight, runs behind a corner. Where did he go? So basically, she ends up following the sound of chainsaws in the distance until Bubba charges her like a bull. Somehow she misses. She misses a point-blank shot with a shotgun. And she's impaled by the chainsaw and basically gutted. Laurie Strode, she is not. The girls try to use Sally's car to run over Bubba, but he throws the chainsaw at them, like his only weapon. And this makes them crash because lol horror movie. And they crash into Richter's garage, and Melody is impaled by, I guess, some kind of stray bar, and she accepts her fate. We get a sweet moment between the sisters as Melody sends Lila to what she thinks is safety, and then when Bubba comes to finish off Melody, she actually apologizes to him for killing MC, saying that MC did not deserve that. Before Melody dies, Lila tries to save the day with Richter's AR, but as mentioned earlier in the film, she's never shot a gun before, so she obviously messes it up. Somehow, though, Sally is still alive. Somehow. And gets a shot in on Leatherface, which this woman was just gutted with the chainsaw. I mean, it was like up and down, slicing all the innards. Whatever, dude. I'm not gonna think about it. They didn't. Sally urges Lila to finish the fight before dying and leaves a loaded shotgun for her. She says that if you run, he'll haunt you forever, which is sort of true, but it's also kind of an interesting point because, like, Bubba clearly didn't remember her, so it's more like the thought of him will haunt you forever because I don't think Bubba will care. Whatever. Anyway, Lila picks up the shotgun and goes to finish the fight, but again, despite his massive size, Bubba is light as a feather, so searching takes a considerable amount of time. He is a very, very sneaky boy. He does get the jump on Lila and tackles her into some nasty looking water, but Lila wrestles free and climbs out of the water. As she does this, we get another glorious scene where Bubba emerges from the water, this time looking more like a walrus. And honestly, there were moments in this film that made me laugh extremely hard, and for that, I will always appreciate it. As Lila tries to crawl away, she actually has her Achilles cut, and it's it's pretty gross. I mean, it's not like hostile gross, but it's pretty gross. Melody saves the day with a last second piggyback ride, which don't ask how she got out of the car. I don't know. You don't know. Nobody really knows, and nobody really cares. Lila is able to shoot both Bubba and the chainsaw, and this was a part that, like, it's weird to me. So she shoots the chainsaw, it starts smoking. It's like, aha, I destroyed your weapon. But then miraculously, Melody picks up the chainsaw and it's working perfectly fine. Which, by the way, if you've ever had it, a perfectly, like, in perfect condition, chainsaws do not work all the time. They are finicky machines. So this one was just shot by a shotgun. Whatever, dude, whatever. We've reached the part of the film where everything that happens, I'm just going to have to say whatever and just roll with it. So anyway, Melody picks up the chainsaw and she hits Bubba at a vertical angle. And it's one of those grazing angles where it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, they expect us to think he's dead with this. Okay, anyway. So he falls in the water and the big boy looks real sad again as he sinks into the water. Again, this is some nasty ass water, so I do understand why he's sad. The sisters hug it out. Hooray, the day is won. Now, I'm going to pause for a minute. Do you think the day is won? Have you seen a horror film, specifically a slasher film? I'm going to give you a minute, and your minute's up. So, obviously, the day is not won, but anyway, we'll get to that in just a second. As the sun rolls up, Lila takes Sally's hat and the picture of the original film's victims. Melody and Lila prepare to ride off to a happy ending, but I mean, of course, come on now. This is a chainsaw film. You know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen. Everybody knows what's going to happen. Bubba pulls Melody from the car and decapitates her. He swings both Melody's head and his chainsaw around. It's incredibly dumb, and again, I couldn't stop laughing. As a comedy film, this movie really works. As a horror, well, we'll get to that. And roll credits. Texas Chain Synth plays over the flashy images of bloody crime scenes and tools, and we are brought into an in-credit scene where Bubba returns home to the original house. So help me if there's another one of these. So, closing thoughts. What did I think of the film? There were things that did well and things that didn't do so well. One thing it did well, gore. The gore was top-notch, very fun. I could have used some more practical effects, but at this point, that's just apparently begging for a miracle, so it is what it is. The story was weak and the characters were dumb. I didn't really care about anyone outside of the two main sisters and Richter. I thought that Richter was just a cool guy. I tend to like the strong cowboy types, so that was cool. I thought that was an enjoyable character to have in the film. I thought the school shooting angle was something kind of interesting with Lila, something to try to ground the action, the violence. And then I actually thought the redemption arc that Melody went through was actually kind of nice. She never came fully around to being like an entirely likable character, but she did a lot more than Dante, so I'll give her that. And at least both of them were actual characters, whereas Dante's girlfriend is so forgettable that I have said her name in this review, and I can't remember. It's Ruth. It's Ruth. It came back to me. Okay, yeah. Ruth was a nothing character, which isn't really the fault of the actress. She just had nothing to do. You know, you get those. You get those victims in horror movies that just really aren't given much. I thought that Sally being brought back was a stupid move when I first saw the trailer. And after having seen the film, I still feel that way. I don't feel like she contributed much at all. And it's really interesting that they essentially just brought her character back to get her ass kicked by Bubba. I mean, I don't know. It's like, say what you will about the travesty that was Halloween Kills, but at least they clearly respect Laurie Strode as a character. Sally was kind of made out to look a little crazy and ultimately a little weak here. And I'm just not really sure I buy all that, but you know, whatever. That is what it is. Obviously, my biggest concern with the film and my biggest issue is not the political aspect of it, which I've already talked about enough in this film. I'm very clearly okay with it. I think that is actually pretty true to the heart of this franchise. What I have a problem with is that they clearly want to have a character that is sending a message, right? A message about assault rifles and violence and all that. But then they clearly also want you to celebrate when Bubba uses that guy's bones to murder him, or when Bubba beats the sheriff to death, or when he slaughters that entire bus of people. It's like one moment the film is saying, oh no, violence bad. But then the next movie, it's like, look at this violence, don't you love it, brother? It's just really jarring when you think about the tones it's going for. And I would say that's my major mark against the film. But overall, you know, I enjoyed it more than I thought it would. Than I would. I'm not an it. I'm a person. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. It took interesting risks, had some good gore, and overall, it was a passable movie. I give it a 6 out of 10. It's not the worst Texas Chainsaw movie ever, and it's not nearly as good as 1 and 2. So make of that what you will. But that's going to do it for me. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Until next time, I've been Das Food. Bye, friends.